Hey fam, today I have a super interesting game I want to show you guys, so let's get into it. We have DonCon on Tevesh Frog Turbo Sire, an adapted version of his Tevesh Frog Turbo Nozzlers with Reality Scramble for Sire Insanity. Then we have a new regular, Sammy from Hong Kong, with his Grixis Scramble list as well. It's similar to my Tevesh Crom Doom Scramble, where you can scramble for either Disruption or a win, or fall back on a strong Turbo Noz Grixis shell. Then we have Hellboy on our top tier, undisputed deck, Fright Thief, with Ikra Crom. The deck features format staples like Sire Insanity, Turgid, and Embercleave. Fright Thief is a hybrid of Turbo Noz and Opus Thief, and if you want to learn more about it, you can watch our Into the Middle podcast episode about it. Finally, we have Nels on Blue Farm, a deck that you believe is the best in the most inbred of metas, even though it hasn't won any tournaments. I think. Before we jump into the match, let's talk table tactics. Having 3 decks that can play into a Sire strategy indicates you're playing into a pod where all of your opponents can grind without a hand. The mirror also means as the game progresses, the Sire decks will want to be careful if they decide to make everyone go hellbent. The Tevesh decks can easily top deck into an A+B, especially if you're playing Roger to net you an extra card, while your own Crom is very unlikely to draw you anything when everyone is hellbent. The player who wants a Sire is probably the one going first, so you can quickly knock out everyone's hand before they can start the game. Or you have a superior board of mana and a Tevesh. On that note, Tevesh is very unlikely to be using his ultimate with 3 Croms in the pod. You want to be using Tevesh here to draw as many cards as you can before he gets knocked out. And funny enough, Fright Thief has an advantage if the game makes it past the early stage. Playing Embercleave means your Crom will beat every other Crom, and also apply enough pressure quickly to force your opponents into bad spots if the table goes hellbent. An early Turgid also disincentivizes wheels even more, and will help feed you lands when your opponents have to fetch their own. Everyone here will want to mull into a fast Adnos or a turn 1 draw engine like Crom, Tevesh, Ristic, or Remora to outdraw your opponents into a win. As we're starting the game here, we see DonCon's on the play. Super bad news for everyone else at the pod. If you haven't seen how DonCon plays Rakdos, you should check the other games on the channel. I'll throw up a link here now. It's important to note because everyone else is mulling their hands knowing DonCon is going first. So you're really incentivized to risk for a good hand on turn 1 over a mediocre hand that does things on turn 3 or later. As we can see here, Hellboy keeps a hand of 3, really trying to go hard or go home. And here we move into the game. DonCon is starting with a Badlands, then a Springleaf Drum, Petal, and Rograk. Sammy follows up with a Mana Confluence, Mana Crypt, and Soul Ring into this Wheel of Fortune. Now wheeling here is pretty dangerous since all 4 decks wheel really well, but if Sammy can wheel into more mana to play and survive this cycle, he'll be in a really good spot with a turn 2 Tevesh. Letting Hellboy have more cards isn't necessarily a bad thing either, because compared to a truly fast Rakdos deck, you want to let Hellboy help with interaction, and since Sammy has a pretty good board, he is most likely to reap the benefits of this wheel before Hellboy can. In response, here's an Entomb by DonCon, tapping Rograk with the Springleaf Drum for a Reality Scramble, setting up for that potential turn 2 Sire using Retrace from Reality Scramble. Wheel of Fortune is resolving now, and Hellboy reveals he kept a Felwar Stone, Crypt, and Land, which was basically a turn 2 Crom hand. Nels reveals a turn 1 Ristic hand. DonCon is discarding Curse of Opulence, Fiery Confluence, Cabal Ritual, and Jeska's Will. Here's a Jewel Lotus from Sammy and a pass. Hellboy drops a tapped Blood Crypt, and Nels follows up with a Volcanic Island. Now we're in turn 2. DonCon starts with a Mana Vault. Mana Vault taps for 3, with 2 of it going into a Grim Monolith. Floating 1 colorless, DonCon is tapping the Monolith and his Badlands to cast Tevesh. He activates Tevesh for 2 Thrall tokens, and then casts Gustha's Scepter. Now what in the Sire is that Scepter? Well, the Scepter is a 0 mana artifact that can exile a card from your hand, or put a card you exile with the Scepter back in your hand. If it leaves the battlefield, you get all the cards back. The Scepter is tech for Sire Insanity, so you can exile away cards you want to keep, so you don't discard them at the end of turn to Sire. And then you can use the Scepter to bring any of those cards back. Sammy plays Morphic Pool, then taps Mana Crypt into Grim Monolith, tapping for 3 colorless. He taps Mana Confluence and Morphic Pool to cast a Meme together, floating 2 mana. If this meme bet resolves, he can take Hellboy's Mana Crypt, Nels' Mox Diamond, then Jeska's Will, or get more black mana with a Cabal Ritual. He also has access to DonCon's Entomb, a Scramble, and a Fiery Confluence to break all of DonCon's artifacts. But Nels has a Swan Song to stop the meme bet. With the floating mana, Sammy cracks the Jewel Lotus for a Tevesh of his own. He makes throws and passes. Hellboy plays a Tropical Island and a Wishcall Talisman, then passes. Here's a Morphic Pool from Nels into a Felwar Stone. Now that the Swan Song is gone, this Felwar Stone is a little less intimidating since the only interaction you can expect at 1 is a Silence, Dispel, Red Blast, or Pyro. Interaction that is a lot more narrow. Now we're starting turn 3 of DonCon. On his upkeep, he casts Advanced Tutor. Tutor resolves, and he plays a basic mountain for the land for turn. Then here comes an Underworld Reach, but Hellboy says no with a Force of Negation exiling Pact of Negation. DonCon activates Tevesh to draw 3 off of Rograk and passes. Sammy plays a Mox Diamond, sacrifices a Thorough draw 2, and taps his rocks and Morphic Pool for a Crom. The Crom and Swan team is flying in the air to DonCon's Tevesh. Sammy drops a fish then passes. This fish is probably going to win him the game. The amount of cards he's going to draw off of the fish and Crom is going to overwhelm the pot. Hellboy plays a land and activates Wishclaw, handing it over to Nels. Then here's a dockside from Hellboy for a massive 11 treasures, but Hellboy is so behind that even 11 treasures isn't that scary, unless he has like a PETA or something in his hand. Especially when Sammy has a Mystic Remora, so even if Hellboy wants to add Nas or PETA, he still has to play through that Remora. Hellboy spends 5 of his treasures to cast a Crom, and then swings it over to Sammy. But then slams down an Embercleave onto Crom, cleaving Sammy for 10 damage. During Hellboy's end step, Nels casts a Mystical Tutor and finds a Force of Will. That's like the scariest thing someone can fetch because that's protection for a win attempt. Nels draws the Force, and now we're in his main phase. And here's a Thassa's Oracle. Oracle is resolving, and in response to the ETB trigger, who could have guessed? It's Console. Console triggers Remora and both Croms. And here's a Fierce Guardianship from Sammy, taunting the Force out, drawing another card for Sammy. And here's a Red Blast from Sammy, ending the stack and drawing a card for Hellboy. We somehow made it past turn 3, and DonCon is starting turn 4. DonCon casts a Heat Shimmer, targeting Hellboy's Dockside, and Hellboy answers with a Flusterstorm that DonCon can't pay for. And here's a pass from DonCon over to Sammy. Sammy is letting the fish go and casting Diabolic Intent. Here's a Rite of Flame, triggering Hellboy's Crom, tapping Soul Ring and 2 more lands for 6. Sammy casts, can you guess? I bet you can't. A Godo. Godo finds Helm of the Host, and you're wondering, how is Sammy gonna win here? Well, here's a Magnetic Theft. Nobody has responses, and as usual in cEDH, Godo wins again. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that game. I wasn't planning on recording it when I was watching, but I'm glad I decided to. I really liked how much stuff happened in that game. Even within a 4-turn game, we saw a Thoracle Consult, an Underworld Breach, an Embercleave on Crom, and of course, the Godo in the Grixis deck. I'm gonna be on the hunt for the next game to feature, so let me know what you thought of the game in the comment section below. Are you gonna play Godo in your deck now? So until then, bye-bye!